So we've talked about traditional societies, and I want to welcome everyone to the Fireside chat for tonight. And when we talk about these societies, we don't delve too much into the individual societies. But it's one of those things that there are roughly 3,000 different tribes and different communities that you can talk about. So there's a particular society that not many people know about. And I want us to think about the origins of humanity again. And I want us to go back in time to 1931, right? Just after World War I, things are starting to head towards and pave the way for World War II. You know, we have radios, we have power. You know, we have modern, for the most part, we started getting into the modern airplanes and modern vehicles. I want you to think about explorers finding a civilization that had never seen a European. 1931. And finding this civilization, they discovered a few things. One thing is that the tribal elder wept when he first met Europeans. Nobody in the tribe could read or write at all. Their tribe had no written language. Not only their tribe, but the tribes next to them. And if you lived on one part of this island where these tribes lived, it's a very large island, comprising, I think, 10 different tribes that spoke all different languages, and even had different types of people that lived there. So these tribes didn't coexist, they didn't breed with each other. Some from some sides of the island look like Asians. Others from other parts of the island look like Africans. And the people in the middle, the Highlanders, had a totally different look than anyone else. They also, like I said, spoke all different languages. 1931, these Highlanders were discovered. Never seen Europeans ever. Now I want you to think about this. Even as late as 1950s, they had a battle between two tribes where 125 people were killed with stone axes and arrows. I want you to think about that. 1950s, they had a tribal war where 125 people were killed between two small tribes. Think about it. That's your grandfather who's still making stone axes and killing people with a stone axe. And his grandson now flies airplanes, flies modern jetliners. Think about that. No one in that tribe could read or write. This guy has master's degrees and he's flying airplanes commercially. In 1.5 generations, we went from can't write to piloting massive airlines. And what do we complain about today? And some other things that I wanted to kind of go over. Because when you think about terms and traditions like that, you go back to a simpler time, but I mean, we're not romanticizing it. They used to eat people. I mean, they used to consider eating a loved one a form of honor and respect. You know, so looking forward into today, there's a couple things that, even in the 1950s in Europe, if you lived in a small town, and even in America, in the 1950s, you would have to solve disputes without use of the court. You know, you couldn't just call a sheriff because you'd have to live with this person, live next to him. So you'd have to find an amicable agreement between both parties where everyone could still live with each other and be friends afterwards. Maybe not the best of friends, but you know, in a way they wouldn't hate each other. And let's think about that. We live in a time where everything's disposable. And I'm not just talking about disposable cameras or cars, or you buy a house, and in 20, 30 years it's decrepit and needs to be completely gone through and updated. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is disposable friendships. You know why? Because you can pack up and move, right? Who cares? Why do you have to get along with your neighbor? You can just move. Or they'll move. Ain't right. We no longer have communities. We have places that we live for short periods of time until we move on to the next. We used to have communities like that. I came from one. If Joe had a problem with Bob, well, you go talk to Bob, or you go talk to Joe and find some sort of solution. Growing up, you never called the cops. You didn't need to. Why bother them? You have a job to do. Smashing or squashing small disputes is not in the job description. But now we live in an age where if Sally Joe's hedge is too big, well, we'll call code enforcement. No. How wrong is that? That you can't talk to somebody. It just ain't right. So, let's think about that. I mean, I have friends that I've had for years, and I'll always have them as friends. But we don't live by each other anymore. And that's, well, mainly because of the military, but, outside of that, it's also because we've moved. So, when you live in an age of disposable friendships, how do you regain those communities? How do you regain a sense of, well, we don't have to call the police. We don't have to call a judge. We don't have to sue somebody. I think we can bring some of that back. We don't need to bring back, cannibalism, but I think there are ways that we can move forward. And like I said, if you live in a small community, everyone knows everyone. You usually marry somebody that's 1 or 2 miles away, and that's how humans have existed for 6 million years. Roughly 2 million years as modern humans. But that's what we've done. Yeah, we've had to be nomadic when we had to be. For the most part, we didn't choose it. It was when it happened. So once again, what are the lessons that our ancestors can tell us? And it's estimated that we treat our elders worse now than most of not only Northern European and European societies, but as well as Native American. So what are we doing? How do we reverse that trend? I saw an article that disturbed me a while back. When you're an elder, when you have kids and grandkids, you want to leave something for them, right? You want to make sure that they're don't struggle like you did. That's what you always hear, right? Well, I'm seeing that more of the last generation, the baby boomers, etc., are spending everything they have to live and just be free away from their kids and do whatever they want to do, which is their choice. They can do whatever they want. Do I like it morally? No, I think it's garbage. You teach your kids. You respect the elders and you teach the young. Just because you didn't like your dad when you were growing up, there's no reason to shut him out of your life. And if you were of that baby boomer generation, what are you doing for your kids? Yeah, I get it, they lead different lives. But they need the knowledge, or we're going to lose it. Watch the kid's eyes light up, pulling a carrot from the ground and eating it himself. According to the parents, the kid never liked vegetables. Canning, how many traditions are we losing? How many skills? And when you look at those other societies, you'll see elders that didn't have politicians. They didn't have somebody who was just a do-gooder, did they? They had somebody that had been through the world, had seen and done many things as compared to today. And now we have professional politicians that do that. Why? What have they done? oh, they're a community organizer. I don't give a shit. They've done nothing. They have no contextual experience to give to any one of their constituents. I mean, really, they should go spend 2 or 3 years on a farm. Learn what the earth is. You know? Grab a log for the fire. So what do we have? We have city councils, HOAs, and governments full of people who don't know how to control their own life, but yet are telling you they know how better to control yours. And it's not an anarchist thing. It is what it is. You know, it's... if they've never really lived, how can they tell people how to live? And I want you to think about that. Because in the big scheme of things, if you're going to give advice to somebody else, you have to have some experience to give. If not, why are you giving advice? If you cannot lead, why are you trying to lead? If you've never led in your life, yet you are in a position sitting in a comfy office in, you know, some organization leading people, but you've never done so, you don't know how the human psyche works, what are you doing? You need experience. And not just, you know, work experience. You can sit in an office for 100 years and not have any clue on how to start a fire. Or you can start hundreds of fires but not have any clue how short office emails have become. You need an all-around experience. When you look at elders, you look at them as an elder. You don't look at them as old people. You know? And I don't know, I guess that's really, it really bugs me. So, even on that note, when you're looking at the human psyche, we assume that psychologists and the like know what they're doing. We assume that they've done the research and peer-reviewed studies, and they've done the studies to conduct psychological experiments and studies and give advice and diagnoses and prognosis on what's going on with the human brain. Well, I'm starting to turn around on that. Because if you think about it, the only people that have really been studied psychologically are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies, also known as weird. Psychologists and psychiatrists are only looking at this little slice of the U.S., Europe, Israel, a couple other places, but you know, true psychology hasn't been done on a lot of traditional methods in societies. It just hasn't been there. When you look at what Weston A. Price did, when he toured, and he was a dentist, and he gives us a foundation for nutrition guidelines that are next to none, but they'll never be followed, not by any sort of government, because you can't feed the planet that way. They're hunters and gatherers. You can't feed anybody as a hunter-gatherer over, you know, a couple dozen people. You know, hunting and gathering, it's a totally different method. You have to have agriculture, right? Well, how do you feed the masses through agriculture? Well, bigger, fatter, faster, cheaper, like we see in supermarkets, right? So, when we look at psychologists and nutritionists, when we look back at traditional societies, we have no psychological record on any of them. When the last year, the medical journals that were published on psychology had 80% people from Western countries. 80%. That were mainly USA, Europe, and the United Kingdom, and a little bit in Asia. But, you know, what about everywhere else in the world? You know, what about studying psychology as it relates to how humans have evolved? We don't know. You know, and I'm sure I'll find out later as I continue this journey, but I want you to think about that. It took a slice, a small slice of maybe 12, 15% of the world, and that dictates how the rest of the world's supposed to be. All your medications and all your antidepressants are based on that 12%. And the only 12% of the studying, this is what's also weird, 80% of the papers written and published in medical journals were written by undergraduates. So they're not professors, they're not in the field. They're written by undergraduates. They're studying psychology. They haven't even gone into the field yet. Right? So, why don't we learn? Let's keep learning. Why stop? Nothing's ever concluded. Science is never conclusive. New evidence and facts and judgment can always change. So the science is settled? No. And it never will be. It never will be. So do what you can. Respect your elders and teach the young. And learn. Keep learning every day. See you guys tomorrow.